I had a question you brought up with like AA stuff and the 12th step. I'm not familiar with the process. I've heard some things, even just videos I make, people are like, "Oh, this is sounds like some of the steps from AA." And it makes sense that Carl Jung, that I get that now how that's correlated. But the idea at the end with the higher power, I've always like been curious about that. And I've sort of seen it with the idea that we we are that higher power always, and it's almost like we just have so many fucking layers that we have forgotten or don't realize it or think that we're not or think that it's something else. But
Or we don't want to
I
think that it's us.
yeah, or like I feel like with that being 12th step, so it's almost like I feel like a lot of people could believe in a
Yeah,
separate other power,
for
and
sure.
that seems a little bit
So
concerning.
it can be. I think it's important to remember that the 12-step process, or AA, or any anonymous group, for example, they're designed to take people out of a really, really like low energy state. They're designed to
Mhm.
try and pull people out of a certain hell. Um, it's 12 steps to being free of the attachment to the addiction, but it's not necessarily 12 steps to being free. And so you can look to a higher power, and that might help you see yourself as a part of everything else. You can see more of a purpose in your life, or you can see more meaning in what you do. But it's just as dangerous to get stuck on that, to get stuck on the idea that there is that higher power. So the next stage beyond that is to recognizing that any division you perceive between yourself and that higher power is still that existent identity, that's still that existent idea of yourself, which ultimately was the reason you fell into alcoholism, which ultimately was the reason that you fell into despair. So it's always just the process of slowly shedding that, right? Whereas the 12-step process, they don't take you all the way to the end where it's like, now you're everything, right? They take you to the end where it's like, now you don't have to worry about going out in public and drinking yourself to death, because you have a sense of meaning and purpose. Okay, now go on and carry on your own, right? So it's not meant to be the full
Mhm.
on thing. It's kind of like Deepak Chopra. He wrote this book, How to Know God, and it's a good book. I definitely recommend reading it. It's got some really interesting some stories in there, and some anecdotal evidence and some historical context about the various levels of awareness, from going to being separate to recognizing that you and God are one. And it does a great job all the way through to the end. And then he stops before the inevitable recognition that there is no division at all, because we don't want to have that conversation. We really don't. You'll notice, like, spirituality will get to a certain level of depth, and then it will almost stop for the sake of continuing to perpetuate its own practice, because, as you said, after a certain point of awareness, all practices become pointless, or rather they are no longer the point, right? They're just practices.